everyone, in this session, I want to talk you through an important concept in HTML and CSS before we start coding, the box model. And the box model is pretty straightforward. It says that everything on a web page and every element represented in a browser is essentially a box. Anything and everything you see on a web page is a box. When you're creating elements with HTML and styling them with CSS, that's when the box model comes into play, because again, everything is a box. If it's a div, it's a box. If it's a paragraph, it's a box. If it's a link, it's a box. Even the browser window that you're using to view a web page is essentially a box. And what do we do with boxes? We put things inside of them. And as we do that, it affects how each element on our overall web page will look. And so the box model consists of a few different parts. Starting from the inside, moving outward, it consists of content, padding, borders, and margins. And so the content is the content of the box, where we place text and images and other things that are relevant information on a web page. The padding, if you imagine in this scenario that we're discussing, a box, acts as kind of an interior padding or buffer between the content and the box that is holding it. So visualize literally a box, and you're putting some stuff inside of it. And let's say there's some space between the inside edge of the box or the inside of the box and the contents of that box. That's essentially the padding that you can add to each element. The border acts as the outside kind of protective layer or border of an element, and you can add to that in terms of styling and the width of it, so it's visible, because the padding is transparent but the border is visible. And then one of the remaining elements for controlling the box model, or the settings on an element's box model, is controlling margin. And a margin is exactly what it sounds like. It's the spacing or distance between one element and the elements around it, or the element containing it. So you can control how much space you have between various elements on a page. And it's also important to note that with each element, they all kind of have, there are default settings for these box models, the values, but you can also control each element with width and height. So let's say you have a 2 foot wide box, but you have 1 foot of padding and you have another 1 foot of border. Now you really don't have a 2 foot wide box. You actually have a 4 foot wide box, because the width and values of padding, of border, and of width and height all control the actual real size of an element on a web page. I know this might be a little bit confusing to understand just talking about it. If you will, imagine you have a wall and you have a bunch of picture frames, and as you're hanging up those picture frames, each one has a different width, it has a different size, it has different contents, it has different size of the frame, and then you're spacing them differently. That essentially is the box model in the physical example of putting frames on a wall. Each element has its own values in terms of the content, padding, border, and margin, but all of them have to kind of be aware of each other in order for them to be laid out properly on a web page. So I'm going to walk you through some of the actual code concepts of what I'm talking about with the box model, so you can get a better understanding of what it is I'm speaking to and how it affects you when you're actually building web pages. Here we go. Hey guys, I'm on the GitHub repository that I showed you guys in the last video, where I'll include the link to this GitHub repo in the show notes below the video, so you can easily head over here and download the project files if you haven't already. You just come over here, click clone and download, or download, and you can download a zip. If you're familiar with Git, which I'm not really going over in this particular series, you can also clone this repo to your local machine. I also showed you guys in the last video how to get set up with VS Code, so I'm not going to go over that again, but I have my VS Code up and running. I have my source files, my project files loaded on my machine, and so I've also started live server so that I can view my project locally on my machine. And so on our project landing page, we have notes from the first lesson, and in this session, again, I'll be going over some of the basics of box model, HTML, and CSS, so you guys can get up and running again with future projects. So I talked to you a little bit about what box model was. And in this instance, I want to show you guys some of the basics of HTML and how that obviously plays into the box model when we're constructing web pages. So if, from that landing page, if you click Sandbox, you'll come to this screen and you'll see a couple different options. You can click Sandbox here again, and this is our empty index page. So if I come over to my VS Code editor and I go to O2 box model, this is this page right here. It's empty, there's nothing on it. If I do type something on it, it appears on this page. Okay, so a couple different things. One, I'm gonna set up the basic template for an HTML page, and in VS Code there's Emmet automatically installed, so you should be able to type HTML. You'll see something like this, HTML or HTML:5. If you do that, it should give you a default setup or template for an HTML page. I'm gonna close my sidebar so you guys can see what I'm talking about. So here we go. Here's like the basics of an HTML page. I'm not going to get too much into this right now, but just know that on any HTML page, you have to have a doc type declared at the top of the index page, letting the browser know what it is, and an HTML tag opening up the document, and then a body tag, a closing body tag, and a closing HTML tag. So really on any page that we'll see, and I'll show you guys also on some popular web pages in a second, you know, there's over 150, I believe, HTML tags. And typically on most projects, you know, especially as you're just starting out, you're probably going to be using somewhere between maybe, you know, 20 to 30. And so, you know, one of the main HTML tags that you're going to be using a lot, and you'll see me using a lot in this project, is a generic div tag, div div tag. This is kind of our catch-all box container. So let's say if we wanted to have an overall box for all of the content on our page. In most cases, there are some other tags you might use, like a section tag, but I'll go into that in another video. In most cases, you're going to use a div tag just to kind of hold your content. So the thing with a div, it's a box element, but if nothing's in it, you're not really going to see anything. So again, our page is pretty empty here, right? I can add some more text. And here we go. That's added in. And that's another example, right, of this content that we discussed in the last video is inside of this div container, or this div box. In most cases, when you're writing text, though, you want a little bit more control. So another common tag that you're going to see on a lot of web pages is what's called a P tag. A P tag is short for a paragraph tag. So it's this, just an opening bracket, P, and then a closing bracket, and then same thing with div, you'd place your text inside of here. Most browsers, and this is the thing that's interesting, most browsers have default styling for paragraph. Usually it's like around 16 pixels. That's a unit of measurement in terms of size, and some type of font styling on it, whether it's a serif or a sans serif, like an Arial or like a Times New Roman or something like that, just to give you guys an example. So div and paragraph are two examples of two very common tags that you're going to see on a website. Another example, and I'm going to place this actually inside of our paragraph tags just to illustrate that if everything in HTML is a box, to the point that I made in the previous part of this video, is that you can place boxes inside boxes, or boxes inside of boxes, right? So another common tag you're going to see in HTML building web page is an A tag. I'm going to add the attribute href. This is what you would see for your typical link tag. All right. So this is normal text. Both of these are contained inside of the P tag, but the anchor tag is special because it also is a box that's telling the browser, hey, whatever's inside of these opening and closing brackets is a link that's going to go somewhere on this site or somewhere else on the internet. So when we come back to our browser, we see that, again, there's automatic styling applied to the browser. I have not applied any CSS to this. By default, Chrome, which is the browser that I'm using, sees that this is a link, gives it a underlined style and a visited color purple link color, so that you know, hey, this is not just normal text like some random text. This actually is a link. So that's three of the most common HTML elements that you're typically going to see on a web page. Another common one that you'll see is a list item, or a list in general. If you go to a web page all the time, you'll see list, right? There's a couple different types of lists. The one that we're going to talk about is an unordered list. So a UL, unordered list. Same thing with everything. In all of HTML tags, most HTML tags have to be closed. So you have an opening tag where you're kind of declaring what the element is. This is where you're telling the browser and telling whatever is interpreting your HTML, this is what this tag is. You have an opening bracket. This is an unordered list. You have a closing bracket. And then you close the tag by having a / and then the same thing, the same declaration, so you can let the browser interpreter know what type of tag this is. And you can see my VS Code editor is saying the UL element represents a list of items, right? That's just a kind of cool little tooltip feature that VS Code has, so it can tell you like what these tags are. The P element represents a paragraph element and a div. The div element has no special meaning at all. It represents its children. It can be used with class, lang, attributes to kind of better control what we do, right? So going back to this unordered list, this is think of this as a parent, or think of it as a family tree. And on one level of the family tree, we have the unordered list. We're saying the unordered list is even with the paragraph element because they're both inside of this div container. And we want to have some children. We want to have descendants of this unordered list. So in this unordered list, we're not going to make another unordered list, although we can. What we have to do initially is say, hey, we have a list item inside of this unordered list. And again, this is a box, right? So it's list. We can do list item 1. Let's do list item 2. Let's do list item 3. So we have 3 descendants. We have 3 children of the unordered list that are list items. Now, there's a thing called semantic markup. There's a lot of people that are very strict about how you should structure markup, what tags should go inside of what. Can you put other elements inside of an unordered list? Yes, you can. Should you wrap them in a list item? You should, but there are instances where people may do something like, I don't know, an H2, which is it's a headline tag, as kind of like the headline for a list, and then the list items. You can do something like that. In some cases, some people don't like that and it's not recommended, but it's not the worst thing in the world. So in this unordered list, we've declared it. We've made some list items, 3 to be exact. We come over to our browser and now we see these list items. Again, these are very common elements. And I actually am going to go back for a second and talk about header tags, which are H1 through H6. But we're going to do an H1. And H1 is, I can use VS Code. An H1 element represents a section heading. So these are heading tags, right? It's kind of a way that you tell the browser, hey, this text or this element is kind of letting the interpreter or the browser know this is the start of a section. This is something important, especially in H1. And H1 is seen as the top priority in terms of heading tags, because it's denoting like this is the start of maybe a page. This is the start of an important section. So we'll just add section 1. So these are some of the most common elements you're going to see on any web page. If I can even I'm on the Google page. If I hit Control-Shift-I, if you're on a Mac, it's Command-Shift-I, it's going to bring up Chrome's developer tools. And in these developer tools, we can kind of see the HTML structure of this web page. And we see here, we have a doc type, opening it up. We have an HTML tag, like I said. Body tag, all of those are closed at the bottom. And then if I were to click this select an element icon here, and let's say I'll click over here. This is all inside an H1, like I said. So this is letting the browser know it's the start of a section. So you get super, complex with your class names and ID attributes, which I'll go back over in a second. But you're seeing that even on some of the most complex and most popular websites, the basics are still in place. You have H1s, you have div classes. I'm sure that I could probably find some paragraph tags somewhere in here. This is a table element. Some paragraph tags that control the text that we're seeing on the page. So again, all of these are the basics of what you're going to see in any HTML web page. And so now I'm going to give some examples of what I was talking about earlier in terms of the box model, how these elements actually affect one another. So we're going to delete all of this. Our page should be blank. Yep, it's blank. And we're going to make think of this as the box wrapper or page wrapper. We're going to give div, and we want to give this a unique ID. An ID should only be on one element per page. So we're going to say ID equals wrapper, right? And then we're going to make another box. We're going to say ID equals box 1. And then we're going to just give ourselves some space. We're going to say div ID equals box 2. So we're not going to see anything. Nothing on this page. We haven't added any content. We haven't added any styling. So the thing about the box model, it's the combination of both HTML and CSS. So you're declaring these HTML elements, but if you don't apply any content, if you're not applying any style, the browser knows what it is, but there's really nothing to show. Really, even if I just added in some more random text, all it's going to do is it's going to show it, but it's not going to do anything. It's not going to really lay it out. It's going to just stack it up like a stack of Legos or something, right? But with CSS, we can tell the browser, hey, this is how I want these things to be presented. This is how I want them to be shown. So in a previous stream that I did, there's three different. I talked about the 3 different ways to include CSS on a page. One is inline, which is the least efficient. So you can do style equals, let's say, background red, right? I'm applying a style tag to this individual element only. So not this box 2 ID and not this box wrapper. That gives this box a background of red. That's cool. It's great. It's working, but it's not efficient. I'm going to go with probably the second best option of how you'd apply style. And in larger applications, this is not the way you would do it. You would actually include an external style sheet, but for our purposes, this is just the quickest way to kind of show everyone what I'm talking about. You're going to come up here to the title element. You're going to open up a style tag. You're going to close it. And in here, in between these two tag elements, the opening and closing tag, we're going to tell the browser how we want to style these different elements. So all 3 of these div boxes have ID elements, right? And so the way you style an ID element with CSS is with the hashtag. So we're going to do hashtag wrapper. Then you're going to do left or opening curly bracket and then close it. So the curly bracket is on the same key as the square bracket, but you hit shift. So that's the square bracket. That's the curly bracket. So I hit shift, curly bracket, my editor automatically knows to close it. So I'm going to add some default styles to this wrapper element because I want to be able to better control how this page lays out. And this is the parent box, so there's really nothing else on level with it. Everything else is inside of it. So I'm just adding some default styles to it. So I'm going to say, like I talked about earlier, I want to set the width of this box. I'm going to set the width to 600 pixels. Think of pixels as inches. They represent squares on your computer screen. And so it depending on the sizing of your browser and your screen, it's relative to that. And that's how it determines the size of any element that you're applying pixels to. There are some other units of measurement, but again, I'll get into that in another video. So now we're saying ID wrapper. We're saying width is 600 pixels. And it is set to 600 pixels, but I can't tell that it's at 600 pixels. So I'm going to add another element within the box model to it. I'm going to say border. I'm going to say I want a solid border, and let's make it 3 pixels wide. So that means all the way around, top, bottom, left, and right. It's going to be 3 pixels. And let's make it gray. You can just do a string declaration for that color. And now we see that this is 600 pixels. The thing with a div element, divs are within the box model, they're block level elements, meaning that if you don't declare a width on them or set a width or have a constraint of a width to them, let's say, let's take this out and save it, it automatically goes the full width of whatever's containing it. So that can be a good thing, that can be a bad thing. Really, you want to be mindful of that because you want to control, obviously, the size of your objects on your page. So we're going to add that back. And now we see that it's condensed and reduced to 600 pixels. So now we've set the width, but you know, it's positioned a little bit weirdly or awkwardly on this page. I'm going to extend my browser just a bit. And I want to set a margin. I want to control the margin, the spacing of this wrapper element. So I'm going to do margin, and let's do 40 pixels. We're going to do a shorthand declaration and declare all sides of the margin. So the first number is the top margin. The second number is the margin to the right of the box, because again, everything is a box in HTML and CSS. The third number is the bottom margin. We're going to set that to 40. And then the fourth number is the left margin. So if you think of a box, it goes top, right, bottom, left. Basically goes clockwise around the sides of a box. So we did top, right, bottom, and then I'm going to do auto again. What this will do, it's going, because we're setting the width of this wrapper, but then saying that the margin to the left and to the right are set to auto, it's going to position it to the center, and it's going to be 40 pixels from the top because we set the top pixels margin to be 40. There's another way of doing this. If I comment that out, and to comment that quickly, I hit Control / on a Mac, it's Command / and VS Code automatically just comments it out, so it's no longer interpreted by the browser. If I wanted to break that up and make that a little bit longer, I could do margin top 40 pixels, then it just takes one number. I could do margin right auto. I could do margin bottom 40 again. I could do margin left auto. Same thing. We see the same effect. These 4 lines are the same as this 1 line, and you can see why it's a little bit more efficient to just do this, because you know, in 1 line of code we're achieving the same thing that we had to do with 4 lines, and managing all that just gets a little bit hectic, makes your code longer than what it needs to be. So we're going to come back to that. I'm going to click in the middle of this. I'm going to hit Command / again, uncomment that, and we have that style set. So this is cool. I have my my wrapper on this parent container, my styling on this wrapper set. I know that it's 600 pixels wide. I know that it has a margin top and bottom of 40 pixels. Left and right is auto, so it's positioned in the center of the page. So 600 pixels, and I have 2 boxes inside of it. I'm going to change the text inside so it's a little bit easier to recognize. Let's do box 1. You know what that is. Box 2. Bam. All right. So I want to style box 1. And then I'm going to want to style, again, hashtag, because we're targeting IDs. This hashtag and then the box 1 knows and is telling the browser, hey, we're looking at this ID on box 1. And hashtag box 2. I'm going to close this. Nothing, right? I haven't set any styles. Let's make the background on this green. Let's make the background on this yellow. So 2 boxes. We see there's some spacing, and that is because by default there's probably some padding Yep, there's some, but again, I said that by default, a lot of browsers automatically apply styling to certain elements. There's a thing called CSS resets, which are commonly used to kind of default or supply default browser settings, no matter what browser someone may be using. That's something I'll also get into in another video. But for right now, just to eliminate that, we're going to target all paragraph tags. Again, we're inside the style header. We're targeting P for paragraph. And we're going to say margin 0. We're going to say padding 0. Two of the things we talked about. And now we see these two things with no spacing in between them because we don't want anything messing that up right now. We're also going to align the text to the center. So we're going to do text align center. And now all these things are in center. So that's decent so far. We kind of seen how we can control the sizing, the margin, the border of elements. One of the other things I want to go into is class-based styling. So we have an ID of box 1 on this, an ID of box 2 on this box, but what if there's mutual styles that we want to apply to both and we don't want to have to write them in two places? We're going to add a class, I can type, a class of box to this element and a class of box to this element. So I have a class on these two boxes, and now I can come back up to my style declaration, and I'll just come under this P tag or P declaration, and I'll type dot or period. That's how you target a class CSS selector. And I will put dot box, same thing as before, opening closing brackets. And now I'm going to add some padding. And padding operates similar to how I showed you with the shorthand margin style rule earlier, where it's top, right, bottom, left. So first number is top, second number is right, third number is bottom, fourth number is the left-hand side. And so now, because we're targeting any item that has a class of box, this dot denotes that we're targeting class selectors similar to how the hashtag targets ID selector. So anyone that has a class of box, I can hit save. And now these two items have paddings of 20 pixels. There's actually another way to do even a shorter hand. If I wanted to do padding, and if I knew that I wanted the top declaration, so top and bottom and left and right, to be of the same value, I could do something like 20 pix, 30 pix. So if I do this and comment that out, this sets the padding of the top and the bottom to 20 and the padding of the left and the right to 30 pixels. Can't see that. You're not going to see much of a change because we don't have much content in here. But that's even another way if you wanted to make that style declaration even shorter. So if I wanted to do something like padding 20, this is just saying make all sides have a padding of 20. And you could do the same thing with margin as well. So, thinking about what we talked about with the box model earlier, and even to the point that I made about div elements and how they take up the entire width of whatever line that they're on, how do we make these two elements lay out correctly or lay out in a different way than what we're seeing here, right? Divs automatically take up the full width. So this first div, because it's declared first, box number 1, it's going to take up the full width. And then box number 2, it's going to take up the full width. Let's say we wanted 2 columns, right? Columns are something that we see a ton of in HTML, or just in web pages, I should say. So we know that this parent container that they're in, this is the border of gray, and let's make that border stand out a little bit more. Let's give it a border of purple, and we'll say 5 pixels. Right? So now we know that this is the parent container. This is box 1, this is box 2, and now we want it to have 2 columns rather than a single column with these two stacked up on top of each other. So we know that the wrapper is 600 pixels. So we're going to change the width of these box items and the display value of them as well. So we're going to come back down to the class. to the class declaration. Sorry about that. To the class declaration for box. And we're going to say width, we're going to split it in half. We're going to say 300 pixels. But what we should see, it's still not going to be 2 columns. And why is that? It speaks to what we talked about earlier with the box model issue, right? Where although the boxes themselves might be 300 pixels, when we add padding to them, so this is padding, we're adding, especially on the horizontal axis. So we're adding padding to the left side and to the right side. So 20 pixels on the left side, 20 pixels to the right side. That's 40 pixels. So really this box is not 300 pixels wide. It's 340 pixels wide. And so if we have 2 boxes that are 340 pixels wide, that's over the 600 pixels that this container will allow. So the one way that we could make sure that both of these items form into 2 columns is we can take 40 pixels off of the width or the padding of these elements and get them into 2 columns. We're going to take it off of the width. So we want it to be a combined width of 300 pixels. So we know the padding is 20 pixels. That's on all sides. So on the left and the right side, that's 40. So if we take away 40 pixels out of this 300, that's 260. We should, and save this, we should see both boxes able to sit next to each other. And apply a display, because the default value or the default setting for display for div elements is block. We're going to say display inline block. So we're saying that it's still a block element, right? It's still a full width item, but we want them to be able to fall inline to each other. This is one way of doing this. Inline that didn't work. Let's play around a little bit. Let's take off pixels. What happens if we take away padding? This is a good example. Okay, this is great. Oh. We're going to say margin 0. We're going to add that 20 pixels back. Let's say 250. So that's interesting. By default, probably because of the space that's actually here in the way in which we wrote the HTML, there's a bit of a space you can see here between the 2 columns. And then because we made it less than 260, there's still some leftover, some white space that we can fill up. So let's you know, in small numbers, bump up this and see. Okay, so we have 250, 258. We see that. But we still see that there's probably about like 2 to 3 pixels of space merely because of this. This is usually cleared up if you can. I bet that'll be gone. Yep. You see, I deleted that white space. The browser was picking up on the spacing between these 2 box div elements. So if I delete that and then just hit space, it's still there actually. That's good to know. I mean, each browser is a little bit differently, so it's good to just pick up and be aware of stuff like that in terms of the spacing between your HTML elements. It happens a lot, especially with like list items and things like that. So I bet now that we've deleted that space, if we say 260, they still fall right next to each other and they fit perfectly. If we go back and we set display to block, they're back on one line. Basically saying any item to having display of block means it occupies its own line, its own space. If you think about it as like a stacking order, that means nothing else can share that level with it. When you change it to inline block, you're saying, okay, whatever the total amount of space that's possible, which in this case is the 600 pixels, if this is less than 600 pixels and another item is also less than that and can fit on the same line, then you should do that. And so that's what's happening in this instance. And so all of this kind of speaks to how you have to be mindful of dealing with the settings and default values of the box model, depending on what items you're working with within HTML. So in this session, we've updated margins, We've updated border elements. We've played around with the display settings, all in an effort to kind of illustrate some of the typical scenarios that you'll run into with box model, right? We've kind of made a simple 2-column kind of layout in this instance, right? And if I were to go to box number 2, right? Now we're just targeting this second box. And let's say I wanted to make the width, rather than that 260, let's set it at default 300, right? Now you see it's a little bit longer than that 260, and because of that, it gets pushed down to the next line. So even though it has a display of inline block, because it's wider than the amount of open space, which is only 600 pixels, it has to get pushed to its own line so that it can fully sit with the width that it has. So that's an instance of how being mindful of the box model and how the combined and total calculated width and size of elements with width, with border, with padding, and with margin take into account, the size and spacing that you have on elements of a page, right? So real quick, before we wrap up, I'm going to go back to 260, and I want to show you guys something too, right? So let's reduce. So this is, we've deleted the white space between the two box elements. We've reduced the set width on the box elements to 260 because we're accounting for 40 pixels of space. I'm going to just add the other parameters just so you can kind of always be mindful that basically this is the right value, this is the left value. They're both 20 pixels, and so that's 40 pixels. We want a little bit of space between these two columns. So we're going to reduce by 10 pixels. So we're going to make each box 250, right? That's actually going to open up 20 pixels if you see it right here. So these two items still sit next to each other, but then there's 20 pixels on the end. We're going to go to box 1 since it's the first one, and we're going to set margin right 20 pixels. So this 20 pixels plus the padding of the box itself plus the width account for the full 600 pixels of space that we have in this wrapper container. If we save, now you see that there's 20 pixels between the two of them, no space or open space on the sides of them, and we still have two columns. And we can play around with this, right, with box model. Let's say we want padding in the middle, like we see here, that 20 pixels, but we also want some padding and space on the sides of the columns, right? Let's come up to the parent wrapper. We're going to do padding. We're going to set a vertical padding of 10 pixels, and vertical padding is a bit easier to handle. We're not too much worried about height issues right now, so we could add a vertical padding of 100, and it's not really going to break anything that we're building. It may not look great, but it's not going to break anything. We're going to add horizontal padding of 5 pixels. So that means, keep in mind, we're talking about left and right side. So in total, this is 10 pixels of padding. We're going to come down to box 1. We're going to change, because we know now that extra 10 pixels of space in the box model will break this. We'll show that break actually. You see that? See that? See that? It breaks. I added an extra 5 pixels to this margin. We're going to reduce this to 10. And actually, let's make this 10, actually, too. So it's really cool to see it all come together. You have to just kind of play around with this. I challenge you guys in this exercise file, in the final version. There's 4 exercises that I've kind of put in the repo for you guys in terms of setting the width on a box, setting the background color, setting border size, and padding value on these. I would definitely take some time, whether it's in this sandbox or on your own kind of code pen or default sandbox area. area, play around with some of the settings and some of the stylings and creation of not only HTML elements, but also the CSS styling that you kind of see me doing here, and just get familiar with how these different elements interact with each other, how they break a layout. Try and make a 3-column layout. So, you know, if I wanted to do something where I wanted to add in a third box, div ID box 3. You know, how would I style that third box and make it so, you know, and you see that this box is a little bit different. It doesn't have a class of box on the element, so it's not picking up on that set style that we declared. But as soon as I do this, okay. So how could I maybe shorten these 3 so that they're all fitting on one line rather than this third one getting pushed to a second line? Play around with some of that, you know, just get familiar with, you know, the give and take that occurs with CSS and HTML and the box model, because these are some of the very important concepts, elements, and things that are important to understand as you start building more complex and nested web and UI layouts. Thank you guys so much for watching this second session of 0 to 100 with HTML and CSS. I will see you guys in the next video. Thank you so much for watching this video on YouTube. Please be sure to like and share. And if you're not already, subscribe to the Coders of Color YouTube channel and activate notifications to stay up to date with new videos from the Coders of Color YouTube channel, where I'll be helping everyday people navigate technology, the web, and code. See you later.